So we have a special guest. We have our good friend Mike Russell. Some of you guys have seen him in the comments, and I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys have read some of his articles in MMA Sports. And but let him tell you guys about himself. Welcome to the show, Mike. So let our viewers know who you are and how you're connected to all this.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me, guys. It's been a long time talking with a lot of you, and kind of both of us have been educating each other, I think, a lot on this group. So it's been a very beneficial relationship, and I guess a pairing that we've had. But I started as a mixed martial arts reporter approximately 16 years ago, almost 17 years ago. I've written for the Fight Network I started out with. I moved on to UFC.com. I've written for FoxSports.com. I've written for YahooSports.com. And then I went out on my own and started my own website because I found that there was, like you're probably finding, a lot of people don't want to tell some stories for unknown reasons. They kind of get stifled. Yeah. And during my first story I did on a corrupt commission in Edmonton, Alberta. And I followed them along until eventually I put a story out that said that all commissions need to look at this commission because I felt someone was going to die under their unwatchful eye, because they'd hired a commissioner that was working for the city that was unqualified for the job. So I always, I like to put it into like comparison terms. And I think he was he was hired to run an airport, and he'd never seen a plane land because he'd never watched an MMA match before. He'd never really, really knew the rules of what he was doing. He was like a bureaucrat from Ottawa. So they brought him in because he was a fundraiser for some of the different things that they were doing in the city, and they didn't want to see him go. So they took a very competent, very uncorrupt person with no real conflicts of interest, and they made up a story to have him fired so that he could take power. And it was like, I kept comparing it to House of Cards because, like everything, it's politically based. So he knew people that could get people out of power, and they were planting evidence on people. And I got involved just kind of benignly because I was asking about some rules that this commission was breaking. And all of a sudden he starts in this long-winded interview, starts telling me other stuff that, like, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe like he's admitting to all these other, perpetual crime type things, I was very, shocked by it. But the end game was that somebody did end up dying. So a UFC fighter named Tim Hague ended up dying as a result of them not registering some of his medical suspensions that he'd incurred from knockouts that he was incurring as a fighter. So there's his family I actually have been working with to try to, they've got a lawsuit going against the city of Edmonton for $5 million. So a wrongful death suit. Wow. So, I like you, I think, I've been talking to James Jafar, as everybody, he's probably been relaying some of the things we've been discussing. There's so many parallels between how your story is being treated and how some of these other stories are being treated, and how, people in power are able to manipulate the system. So that has been kind of my focus since I went independent, was that I wanted to, kind of expose corruption, kind of stop it. I've had, pretty good success. I had an ex-member of Tmoa, aka Jamaat al-Fukra, as you mostly know. Ali Abdelaziz was where I kind of, we crossed paths and intersected. And I reached out to James. I think was it before the pandemic, James, or during the pandemic?
That was before the pandemic, yeah.
And we talk about everything. It'll be like a Sunday, and we'll just send a funny joke and stuff. But the one thing that we've talked about throughout all of this was that one of the reasons why this story has been stifled so much is because some of the people that have been trying to, quote unquote, expose different things are a little bit too willing to not fact check things and willing to lump everybody in together. So when we speak about TMOA or MOTA or any of the other iterations that they had, it's very important, I think, because Islamophobia is, as we know, as bad as it's ever been post 9/11. People like to lump people in just because of certain beliefs that they have that, you're as bad as the next person, when they don't realize that it's un-Islamic, the acts that the people are doing. So James has been a really great really great resource for me, because I check in on him sometimes with some things, and I'll say, I've got a question about this. And as a scholar himself that's, learning and teaching and helping people understand what true Islam is, we kind of bump ideas back and forth, and like some of the stuff he'll bring up on the show sometimes, and some of the things that I'll run by people and say, no, you're looking at it wrong, because that's what it's about. But the people that are trying to stop these ideas from being spread and talked about are the same people that are the ones that we're talking about. So it's not, but if you can weather that storm of people where, I've had people attack my children, they've found them online, and they've gone through and made threats, or, shared photos and other things. And what they're trying to do is scare you off telling the truth. And that you're doing something right when you've got people going to that extreme. It's not like we're just brushing the story. So when I was just writing about who I thought was going to win a fight, who I thought won a fight, who I thought, just delving on the surface, was when I never really got any pushback. But it's when you're actually digging deeper along the surface, and it scratches some people the wrong way. So that's where I met James. I actually worked for a while. I can't talk about it because of contractual reasons, but I was hired by a company based on my work on Ali Abdelaziz to kind of do more research on Jamaat al-Fukra and TMOA. So I have a lot of resources of people that I've spoken to, that I've put you guys in touch with and stuff. So so we're kind of on the same page now, as far as, wanting to get to the bottom of what was this group about.
So as being objective, like you weren't born in TMOA, you have nothing, like you just came kind of in from like the outside looking in. So like, give us your assessment as an objective person, that you're not Muslim, you're not an Islamophobe. It's not like you have anything against TMOA, as far as like what you know about corruption, cults, your just whole assessment. Give us your assessment of what TMOA is from an objective outsider.
Sure. And my personality, as James can attest to, is I kind of go, down a rabbit hole, and I find resources beyond regular resource. I talk to experts, I talk to psychologists. I've got probably a dozen law enforcement agents, both former and present, that have, I've been talking to with information that we've been bantering, sending back and forth. So when I look at TMOA, I think what the blind spot here is you don't even look at religion. Take religion out of the picture completely, and you look at it, you dissect it like you're a law enforcement agent or the law. It's no different than John Gotti's criminal organization from the top on down. And even the way that there's the power play going on at the top now, no different, because they were either instructed to, or it's hard to say, because nobody will ever admit that the mob boss told them to make the hit. So there's so many similarities. I think it's just, they're a criminal organization. If I'm asked about it, it was a criminal organization masking as an Islamic, I guess sect is a bad word too, because people think of it as like a 4-letter word. So I don't know how to call it, but it was, I come from a Catholic church background. I no longer am in the Catholic church because of my problems and my feelings towards them being very cult-like in a lot of their behavior, especially sexual exploitation of children that, I saw covered up even in my hometown. So I feel that if you take away all the religious side of it all, you don't even need to look at that, because we know that everything that they've done by your exposing of the videos and what they said and what they've done is not Islamic at all. So there's no religion. People try to say that I'm an Islamophobe because I write about Ali Abdelaziz, who they say is Muslim. And we've talked about it. His behavior, his past, the way he treats, people, is very un-Islamic. So to use that as an excuse, the same as he said he was only arrested after 9/11 because people were being racist towards him, when really, no, it was because you had all those passports and identities and bank accounts that you were kiting money through. So we can't cry that anytime we disagree with somebody, because you can't. They're trying to say that you all are un-Islamic and you're shirk and you're everything else, when you're trying to find the true path of Islam, to share it, and to, you're actually acting like the way that the Dar al-Islam tried to act, by having a brotherhood and a sisterhood and embracing people into the fold, rather than saying, no, you have to follow Islam this way, our way, or no way. And it's cult 101 from every cult expert I've talked to, every book I've read. What they're doing is wrong.
So one thing real quick. One thing that we get a lot is that we have an axe to grind. We're bitter. We had some issues. We didn't get the girl we wanted, or lost the girl that we wanted, or some sort of issue as to why we are spending the time and energy on Janani, TMOA, the cult, or whatever. So, as far as your work, have you found any of that type of thing where people are saying, well, you motivated by some sort of ulterior motive? I know you mentioned the Islamophobia thing, but anything besides that, like, because that's kind of what we get.
100%. And you know what? Every one of my scratching where it really scratched a little deep and it kind of hit a little bit close to home because the truths were coming out. Every one of those ones, I had this, and I've shared it with James too. So I keep telling him, make sure that you have all the receipts, right? If the truth is the truth. No matter what somebody explains it away to be and how they try to say that it's, something it isn't, the truth is the truth. So if you have letters, if you have people's testimony, more than one person, I always get a couple of people. And if people don't want to give you their name, and if they don't want to speak, give their voice, all of my great editors have told me you can do that, but just make sure that you have at least two people that were in the room when that was being said, so that it doesn't come back on that person. So don't just think of it as yourself being protected. Protect your wit. Like, I have sources right now that I've given pseudonyms to that are like could lose their job. I had sources that spoke to me only to say they can't speak to me because of agreements they've signed within law enforcement. And then Ali tried to sue them and tried to have them fired. So that's, again, how you know that you're scratching the right surfaces. In Edmonton for years, while I was writing about how someone's going to die, how this guy was incompetent, how he was a narcissistic, psychopath, sociopath, however you want to put him in the dark triad, where he doesn't care about the well-being of others as long as it helps him personally or professionally. Going back to that guy, he went into the law branch the first day that he took the job. And this is what he told me during this long-winded interview when I was just calling for one answer. And he told me the first thing I did was I went into the law branch and said, what am I going to have to do to make sure, not what am I going to have to do to make sure nobody dies? What am I going to have to do to make sure I don't get sued if somebody dies? So motives of there has to be, almost a psychological test done on some of these great cult leaders. Everyone that's been arrested or, they've done like forensic psychology on, they found out that they've got this, they will do whatever it is. And the guy I was dealing with in Edmonton, like I said, came from Ottawa politics. So he knew all the tricks of the trade. He was putting out fake rumors that would get back to me so he'd know who was feeding me information that were within his counsel. So it was a cat and mouse game. But what happens is that the greater part of it all is if you can withstand, this guy for years was telling everybody he was going to sue me. I'm probably going to sue him. So what that is, it's a lazy way of not suing me because he'd have to pay money. But then people immediately think, well, nobody that's not innocent would sue somebody, so he must be innocent in their head. It's just a psychological tactic. So I've been called. So Edmonton, I was threatened by athletes there that told me to mind my own business because they were on the receiving end of some of the safety things that this guy was kind of looking the other way for, which led to a death. Now, people that like legitimately wanted to change things there are thanking me, and nobody wants to talk about all the flack I went through, but I kept all those receipts too. So if anybody wants to bring it back out, screen grab everything, because these cowards will erase stuff as soon as they post it, because either they'll get in trouble by one of their so-called leaders or whatever it is. But the thing is you got to realize is that I talked to an FBI agent and an NYPD intelligence agent, an X1. They both told me that. I said, so what's going on? Does anybody have to be afraid that anything's going to happen with this group? And they said, no, because they're being so watched by all of these different, lettered agencies across the globe that if any of them split up, they would, not only would they be shut down, but they would have even the ones that they suspect were guilty of some of these violent crimes, some of these fraud crimes that, we have evidence of stuff like we've talked about, James. I have a trove of evidence that I received from some intelligence agents that point to Barry Adams, who led the hit squad in Texas, that there were other things that he was involved with that weren't really tied back to him originally, that, you know, they were bringing, like Stephen Pastor was going to be the guy that was going to help build the bombs for Toronto. So, you know, there were big things going on, but people always say, well, maybe they were just some bad apples. Well, these bad apples were the ones at the top of the cart. Right. You can't look at the fact that the bad apples were James Williams, right, who was the leader in Colorado, James Upshur, who was one of the leaders in Colorado. You know, we've got all of the guys that were the top echelon that just happened to get caught. Barry Adams in Toronto, or on the Rainbow Bridge. You look at these people and you think it's not a coincidence that all the leaders were caught up in these, you know, so-called, you know, blood feuds from Pakistan that they're, you know, these guys are taking up in Toronto. Come on. Right.
Let me say something real quick. Let me say something. Unapologetically, I want to, you know, address the elephant in the room. And first, I want to say, Mike, we appreciate you, you know, for coming on, sharing your information. We're going to address this elephant in the room that we know we're going to get some flack for. And I'm not about to sugarcoat this at all. So from a different vantage point, you coming onto our platform, some of the community members or even some of our, you know, companions or whatever, they would look at this as a sign of betrayal. Let's be very clear. You know, they're going to be looking at it as like, oh, you know, you guys let some, you know, non-Muslim or whatever they might, you know, call you or refer to you as. And we want to be very clear here. I do appreciate what you said about the truth, because that's the truth. The truth is always going to be the truth. You know,
100%.
Falsehood will not be able to stand up to truth. We are about the truth at this point. We want to bring about and shed light on the true Islamic, you know, practice. This is what we're interested in. You know, we have no other interest, you know, and we appreciate that you would come on and share your information. And we're honored about this, just to be very clear. So go on.
I got a question. So like one of the things that you know a lot about like the criminal aspect of El Fuqra, TMOA, MOA, whatever you want to call it. And one of the things that we've like, I got questions coming in right now. Like for instance, an individual named Chris Childs. And like he's one of these people that was like involved in these like Colorado crimes. Yeah, and then he like disappeared. So like, what do you know about like him specifically? Because we know we have his family members that are like, he has children that don't even know like what happened to him, where he's at. Like, so anything
was he the one that went to Pakistan?
Yes.
Was he not the gentleman that died a few years ago?
We don't know.
Yeah, so, like, there was a gentleman that died, and I believe it was Chris Childs a few years ago. Let me find out those dates. Don't quote me on it, but I believe it was him and Pastor that went over at the same time because they were involved in the same breakup. I believe he did pass away a few years ago. I believe that was the news.
What crimes were they involved in? Why they were here? What made them run?
Childs was involved in that whole case with Upshur, with Williams, and there was a few of them that were involved as well. I can't remember all the names off the top of my head, but they were running some workman's comp schemes where one was posing as the other, and they were saying they hurt themselves, and he hired himself and he got hurt, but they were using multiple IDs. So, you know, we've seen pictures of the IDs. It's all them. You can tell it's the same person with his head cocked one way, cocked the other way. And they were all caught. But that was the other thing that people don't realize, because, you know, not a lot of people other than certain circles know about it. But again, when we're reading things from Martin Moyer, and that's the problem I have, is Martin Moyer, I'll send you some of the videos of some of the ads he's put out about like Hillary Clinton and, you know, being a lesbian and all this, you know, crazy stuff. Well, then he just happens to have some fans that just give him some information in law enforcement. That's where it starts off, right? So he makes these contacts. Right. So that legitimizes a regular kook who's hiring Hooters waitresses to go into like, you know, TMOA businesses to try to like shake it up. And it's like, it's not how it's done. If you want to do actual journalism, don't pose as a journalist, do it right. But anyway, they were workman's comp scheme. Remember they had the compound that they basically bought through workman's comp. And they had they'd stolen a bunch of rental equipment and they never paid for it with fake IDs. There's a whole list of stuff.
One thing that we talk about, and it really hasn't been covered much on our show or on the content we put out there, is like, so you have people in TMOA that will take different positions. So you have the people that take the position of, like they're just bad apples and they're rogues acting on their own, which is actually a minority position because most people actually know that they're operating under Mubarak Jelani's order. Then you have people that take that position. Then you have people that take a position that, like, no, they're actually doing like God's work, holy work or whatever. So like one thing, like, could you talk about for our audience, like one, your knowledge or the evidence that you know of Mubarak Jelani being directly like involved or giving orders, and two, the aspect of like when Barry Adams and them were planning these bombs and all these different things, they actually had like mistresses all over the states that came and testified against them. They had girlfriends and people that they were like, this is not how Muslims should act, but they were doing this thing, supposedly doing God's work.
I actually went to the site of where that bomb plot was supposed to be this summer, and I shared some of the photos with James and some of the stories with James. I spoke to so if you don't know anything about the plot, it was Barry Adams. There's a guy that's got a couple different identities he uses. He goes by either Robert Wesley or Robert Johnson. There is he goes by Calvin Harris, but he was also Kaba. He went by Kaba, which was, a family that's still involved. Who else was involved? Glenn Ford, who was the Emir in Toronto, was involved as well. So what happened was, in as quick as I can tell it, at the Rainbow Bridge in Toronto, Glenn Ford was driving Barry Adams' mother-in-law's car, who he had been estranged from for a number of years for whatever reason. He was driving her, because he dropped the kids off there apparently one summer, according to her testimony, and just left them. And then she had to fly back to Trinidad to try to find them and drop them off. So they were driving his mother-in-law's car, who he had just made up with, and borrowed her car to go across the border to go pick up all the weapons and parts for the bombings that they needed. There were backpacks that were packed at another member's house that were packed with machetes, spear guns for hand-to-hand combat, shotguns, sawed-off shotguns, I think some semi-automatics, pistols. So each person was going to be carrying a backpack. If the bombs didn't go off or if something happened while they were trying to flee, they were going to just chop through the crowd during Diwali. So that's the biggest festival in Hindu culture, is Diwali, the Festival of Lights. So there are two targets that were going to go off at the same time using time bombs. I have the receipts for the timers that Glenn Wesley or Johnson bought. They actually, and he used two different names, but when you put them together, actually called Robert Johnson. It was like something Roberts. And so everything was just, it was sloppily done. But to answer your question about were these just rogues? No, these were military precision. So they would have multiple people go in and scope out the different places and take pictures and photographs. They took video and they dress up as like, when they went into the Hindu temple, one of them wore like a straight wig and shaved his beard off. And he got caught like filming these different areas. Well, the woman that I met this summer was a security guard at the theater that they were planning to bomb. And now it was a woman's shelter for single, single mothers. And when I started letting her read through the plans that were in Barry Adams' handwriting, she actually openly started weeping, because there was a line in there that I don't know the exact words. I'm just paraphrasing, but I can share the documents with you. It said, this is an area that there will definitely be people that are non-Muslim, non-Hindu, but we will basically chalk them up as being friends of Hindus. Like that's how we will justify it to Allah, is we will say that they were friends of Hindus. Well, it's not Allah that has this problem with Hindus. It's your Pakistan-based sheikh who hates Kashmiris that are Indian, who hates Indians. He's pushed that upon you, because the people that I interviewed on that street, it's in Little India that they were going to bomb. So there were bazaar fronts there. I took video of it. There was like music playing at this. There was an actual Pakistani food restaurant across, like an outdoor bazaar type restaurant from Lahore, where Jelani's from, and they had a clothing shop that would have been obliterated in the blast as well. So they were like, telling, and the woman that was a security guard at the shelter let me go in, and I took pictures of where they had drawn out where they were going to put the bombs, so that they blew up natural gas lines. And they had people testify at the trial that said it would have taken out the whole city block. And at the time, there was a public library that shared a wall with the theater that there could have been children in at the time as well. So they estimated that it would have been either between 3,200 and 7,000 people that would have died. And that would have been, like so much more than even 9/11 took. And it would have marked Toronto as where I'm from the Toronto area. I'm from Ontario, just outside of Toronto, would have marked us as being ground zero for Islamic terrorism in Canada. And it was meant to be. It was the first trial of its kind. So when they actually had the trial, you want to talk about weird kind of things that they do. They put all the men on a stage that were, up for, they had them for like all these different charges, but at the end it got whittled down to just public endangerment because they never actually pulled it off. If they had pulled it off, everybody that was involved, and even the people that I've gone through, I've got the actual evidence binder that I was given from some intelligence agents from the States. I've gone through it with a fine-tooth comb, and I've shared pages with James and, analyzing different things. There's other crimes and other people that were involved in these plots that got away with it because, they used so many of their Islamic name changes, which is very strange to me, right? Like, as far as I know, when you typically take a name, you don't change it 4 or 5 times to something else to try to, it's the same as their government names, right? They always would be changing those as well. So, what I want to say to you guys is you're doing such a good job because of the backlash that you're getting. But the better part of that is like me, there's people that will reach out that you never knew would reach out. I've had ex-girlfriends of Ali reach out. I've had, people that were involved with the commission in Edmonton during all of the stuff that was going on that were reaching out because they were being emboldened by the fact that their stories were the same as these ones. So keep going, do what you can, and just don't let it deter you from doing what's right. And that's all.